table after her team's quarterly meeting, paper cups and half-eaten pastries scattered between laptops. Someone laughed behind us. Someone else checked their phone. And my wife, Claire, adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and said that marriage didn't make me a priority anymore. She added that I should understand that by now. No one looked at me directly, but everyone heard it. I didn't respond. I didn't smile either. I just stopped speaking. The room kept moving without me. Claire turned slightly toward Mark, the corporate trainer she'd brought in for the third time that month. He was already nodding, already comfortable in the space that used to be mine. His hand hovered at the small of her back, not touching, not hiding. I stood there long enough for it to become awkward, then picked up my coat and left without saying goodbye. By the time I got back to the office, 3 notifications were waiting on my phone. A calendar update from Claire marked off-site session. A message from HR reminding me about updated risk tables. And a photo someone had posted from the meeting, Claire mid-sentence, marked beside her, my absence cleanly framed like it had always been that way. At home that evening, she arrived late and moved through the apartment as if I were furniture. Shoes off, phone charging, shower running. She spoke from the other room, her voice casual, explaining that the company needed her more right now and that I shouldn't take things personally. She said Mark was good at what he did and that trust meant not asking questions that didn't matter. I didn't argue. I didn't ask anything. The next morning, I didn't adjust my schedule when her meeting ran long. I didn't move my calls to make room for her lunch plans. I left when I said I would and came back when it suited me. She noticed, but only enough to test it, to see how far it would go. By the end of the week, Mark's name appeared everywhere. On her screen, in her stories, in the spaces she no longer tried to explain. And still, I said nothing. From the outside, it probably looked like acceptance. From the inside, it looked like silence settling into place, steady and deliberate, like numbers aligning on a page before the result becomes unavoidable. The first time someone else acknowledged it, it wasn't dramatic. It happened in the elevator at work, late afternoon, the kind of quiet where everyone pretends not to exist. A colleague from underwriting glanced at my phone screen when it lit up and then looked away too carefully. He cleared his throat and said that sales leadership had been busy lately. The words stretched thin with implication. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. By the time I reached my floor, I already knew what he was referring to. At my desk, I opened the shared corporate calendar I still had access to through Claire's account. She'd never bothered changing permissions. Her day was blocked with sessions labeled vaguely, but Mark's name appeared often enough that it stopped looking accidental. Training reviews, strategy alignment, post-session debriefs. The spacing between them told a clearer story than the words. That evening, she didn't come home at all. There was a message sent sometime after dinner, brief and functional, saying she'd stayed out with the team and would be back late. I didn't reply. I didn't ask where. I didn't remind her that she'd promised to be home. I ate alone, washed one plate, and went to bed. The next morning, she returned while I was already dressed. Her eyes flicked toward the suitcase by the door, then away. She commented on a forecast on the kitchen screen, something about numbers not being reliable if you didn't pressure test them. It sounded rehearsed, like a line she used at work. I nodded once and left. Over the next few days, small things shifted. I stopped adjusting my routine to sync with hers. I didn't wait up. I didn't fill silence with questions. When she spoke, I listened without reacting, the way I did during risk briefings when the outcome was already clear. She noticed the change, but misread it. Her confidence grew. She stopped hiding her phone. Mark's messages came through while I was in the room. She didn't turn the screen away. She didn't apologize. She took a call from him one evening and walked onto the balcony, glass door half open, her laughter carrying inside like it belonged there. A friend of hers texted me the following afternoon. Just to check in, phrased too carefully. She mentioned seeing Claire and Mark together after a conference session, how close they'd seemed. The message ended with a question mark that wasn't really a question. I didn't respond. By the end of the week, Claire acted as if the situation had stabilized. She moved freely, confidently, assuming the absence of resistance meant agreement. She didn't see what was happening underneath. She didn't see that I wasn't absorbing the situation anymore. I was measuring it. The evidence didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated quietly, the way risk does when no one is paying attention. I didn't go looking for it at first. I didn't need to. Claire had grown careless in the confidence that silence meant surrender. One morning, while reviewing a benefits model from home, her tablet lit up on the counter beside me. A notification preview slid across the screen before it dimmed again. Mark's name. A line about how last night had been worth rearranging his schedule. No emojis. No disguise. Just familiarity where it didn't belong. I didn't pick up the device. I didn't scroll. I didn't confront her when she walked in later, humming, already dressed for another off-site. I closed my laptop, went to work, and let the day run. By the end of that week, patterns had formed. Shared expenses posted at odd intervals. Meals charged in parts of the city she never went to with me. Hotel parking fees coded under business travel. The numbers told a story she wasn't bothering to rewrite. She assumed I wouldn't notice. She forgot what I did for a living. At home, her behavior shifted again. She stopped explaining absences entirely. Mark's jacket appeared once, draped over a chair as if it belonged there. She didn't remove it when she noticed my eyes on it. She waited. When I said nothing, she smiled, almost relieved. A colleague from her department greeted me one afternoon in the lobby with a look that lingered too long. He mentioned how well Claire and Mark worked together, how natural their chemistry seemed during sessions. He laughed lightly, then caught himself and apologized. I told him it was fine and walked away. That night, I slept in the guest room without comment. She didn't follow. In the morning, she texted from downstairs asking if I wanted coffee. I left before she came up. More messages appeared, not just from Mark, from people orbiting their world, planning dinners, congratulating them on presentations, inviting them places as a pair. The assumption was built in now. The marriage was an afterthought. I began saving what mattered. Not screenshots, not dramatic proof, just access, just clarity, account permissions, document timestamps, a complete picture, assembled without emotion. Claire mistook my withdrawal for accommodation. She leaned into it. She booked longer trips. She stopped checking in. She moved through the apartment as if it were transitional space. And through all of it, she never once asked what I was thinking. She didn't see my expression change. She didn't notice that the quiet wasn't passive anymore. It was deliberate. I didn't announce anything when I started leaving earlier. I didn't frame it as distance. I simply wasn't there as much. I took meetings off-site. I stayed later at work when it made sense. I stopped being predictable. Claire noticed only when it inconvenienced her. One evening, she stood in the doorway as I buttoned my coat and asked where I was going. The question wasn't concern. It was inventory. I told her I had plans. I didn't explain. She watched me for a moment, then stepped aside as if granting permission she didn't realize she'd already lost. Over the next few days, I began reducing my footprint. I moved personal files off shared drives. I redirected mail. I closed a joint account quietly and opened another in my name. There was no rush. I treated it the way I treated any long-term projection, adjusting variables until the outcome stabilized. She grew more open in response. Mark was suddenly everywhere. His name appeared in conversation without context, like it belonged there by default. She spoke about him the way she used to speak about me, with casual authority. She assumed proximity equaled permanence. The morning I packed, she was already gone. I chose what mattered and left the rest exactly where it was. No notes. No signals. Just absence. I turned off location sharing. I muted notifications. By the time she realized I hadn't come home, I was already settled somewhere she wouldn't think to look. Her calls started that evening, one after another. Then messages. Short at first, then edged with irritation. She asked where I was. She said this wasn't how adults handled things. She said we needed to talk. I didn't respond. By the next day, the tone shifted. The messages came faster. She mentioned work stress. She implied misunderstandings. She said she hadn't realized things were that bad. I watched them stack up without opening them. At the end of the second week, I finalized what I needed. My attorney confirmed receipt of the filing and told me everything was in order. The timing was clean. The documentation was thorough. There would be no surprises. I sent one message. One sentence. I told her I was no longer participating. She read it immediately. After that, there was nothing. No reply. No call. Just silence on her end for the first time since I'd known her. From where I was sitting, the city moved on as usual. People crossed streets. Phones buzzed. Somewhere else, Claire was staring at a screen, realizing she no longer knew where I was or what came next. And for the first time, she wasn't controlling the pace. The first crack didn't come from me. It came from Mark's world collapsing under its own weight. I only noticed because Claire started calling again, this time from unfamiliar places, her voice messages tight and controlled in a way that didn't match her usual confidence. I didn't answer. I didn't block her either. I let the calls ring until they stopped. Through work contacts, the kind you accumulate over years without thinking about their future usefulness, information surfaced on its own. A compliance review had been triggered inside her company. Nothing dramatic on the surface. Just questions about vendor relationships, training contracts, reimbursement practices. Mark's name appeared more often than it should have. The timing was inconvenient. The optics were worse. I hadn't initiated anything. I hadn't needed to. When people get careless, all it takes is one raised eyebrow in the right meeting for attention to turn. Claire showed up at my office building one afternoon without warning. I saw her through the glass before she saw me. She looked composed, but not relaxed. She spoke to the receptionist, gave my name, and waited. When she realized I wasn't coming down, she left without causing a scene. That evening, her messages changed again. She said work was complicated right now. She said people were asking unfair questions. She implied Mark was under pressure and that it was affecting her team. She ended by saying she wished I were there to help her think things through. I didn't respond. A few days later, Mark's social media presence went quiet. No more motivational posts. No tagged photos from conferences. No after-session group shots. His name disappeared from Claire's calendar, replaced with placeholders that didn't quite hide the absence. At the same time, my attorney forwarded an update. The filing had been served. Claire would receive official notice shortly. Everything was proceeding as expected. She called again that night. This time, she left a longer message. She said she didn't understand how things had escalated so quickly. She said she felt blindsided. She said she needed to talk before decisions were finalized. I listened to the message once, then archived it. From where I stood, there was no escalation. There was only sequence. One action followed another. Variables responded to pressure exactly as they always do. Claire had expanded her boundaries, assuming nothing would push back. Mark had operated as if proximity meant immunity. Neither of them noticed when the environment shifted. They only felt it when the structure they relied on started to fail. And by then, I was already outside the system they were trying to stabilize. The shift became visible the moment Claire stepped back into public spaces that used to protect her. At first, it was subtle. Meetings ended faster. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. People who once leaned in now kept a careful distance, the kind that isn't hostile but isn't warm either. I heard about it through channels she didn't realize still connected to me. A former colleague mentioned that her team lunches had thinned out. Someone else noted that invitations had stopped arriving without explanation. No one framed it as judgment. It was described as discomfort, as if the atmosphere around her had changed and no one wanted to stand too close. At a company gathering I chose to attend, purely out of timing, I saw it myself. Claire stood near the edge of the room, composed, scanning faces. She laughed at the right moments. She nodded when spoken to, but the rhythm was off. People spoke to her the way they do when they're already halfway gone. Mark wasn't there. Someone I barely knew from her department passed by and said, quietly, that things had gotten complicated. He said it with the tone people use when they don't want follow-up questions. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Claire noticed me across the room then. Our eyes met briefly. She hesitated, clearly calculating whether to approach. Before she decided, someone else interrupted her. By the time she looked back, I was gone. Later, I learned that questions had started circulating openly. Not accusations. Observations. About timing. About boundaries. About how certain relationships had been allowed too much visibility. No one defended her. No one attacked her either. They simply stopped including her. That was the part she hadn't planned for. She reached out again after that event. The message was shorter this time. Less controlled. She said she felt exposed. She said people were acting differently. She asked if I had noticed. I didn't reply. The social structure she relied on had shifted without announcement. It wasn't a takedown. It was something colder. A recalibration. People adjusted their behavior the way systems do when a variable proves unstable. By the end of that week, Claire was alone in rooms she used to dominate. Conversations ended early. Support thinned out. The absence wasn't dramatic, but it was complete. And for the first time since I'd known her, the confidence she carried didn't land anywhere. It just echoed back to her. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly, like a room emptying out while the lights stay on. Claire started reaching for people who used to orbit her automatically. The responses came slower, then shorter, then not at all. She showed up at places she hadn't been in months. Cafes near the office. A gym she used to love before she decided she was too busy. She lingered longer than necessary, scanning faces, waiting to be recognized. When she was, it came with surprise, not warmth. Conversations stayed on the surface. No one asked follow-up questions. No one invited her anywhere else. She tried family next. I heard about that through mutual acquaintances. Dinners cut short. Advice that sounded like concern but landed like distance. People told her to focus on herself, to get perspective, to let things settle. No one offered to step in. No one offered cover. She sent me a message one evening that wasn't framed as a request. She said the apartment felt too quiet. She said the walls made noise at night. She said she didn't like coming home anymore. I didn't answer. When we finally crossed paths again, it wasn't planned. I was leaving a meeting downtown when I saw her across the street. She looked thinner, not fragile, just less certain. She noticed me a second later and froze, as if unsure whether approaching was allowed. She walked over anyway. She didn't touch me. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke carefully, explaining that things had become confusing and that she felt like everything had shifted too fast. She said she didn't recognize the situation anymore. She asked if we could talk, really talk, somewhere private. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I had another commitment. I didn't explain what it was. I didn't offer a different time. I stepped back and left. She stood there for a moment after I was gone. I saw it in the reflection of a window as I walked away. She hadn't expected that response. She'd assumed proximity still gave her leverage. It didn't. From that point on, she started appearing closer to my orbit. At places I frequented. At times that weren't accidental. She didn't confront me. She watched, waiting for a signal that never came. I was there, but I wasn't reachable. Present, but disengaged. She could see me living without reacting to her presence, and that unsettled her more than anger ever would have. She had lost the ability to pull me back in, and there was nothing left around her to compensate for it. The confrontation happened without raised voices or dramatic timing. It unfolded the way everything else had, quietly and without witnesses. Claire waited for me outside my building one evening, standing far enough back to look incidental. She didn't wave. She didn't call my name. She just watched until I noticed her. I stopped a few steps away, close enough to hear her, far enough to keep distance intact. She spoke first, carefully, as if tone alone might reopen access. She said she needed clarity. She said she felt like she was losing everything at once and didn't understand how it had gotten there. She said she wanted to fix things, but didn't know what rules she was supposed to be playing by anymore. I didn't correct her language. I didn't fill in gaps. I let the silence do what it needed to do. She continued, slower now. She said Mark was gone. She said the situation at work had changed. She said people were acting like she'd crossed lines she hadn't realized were visible. She implied mistakes, not decisions. She implied confusion, not intent. I listened. When she finished, I told her that I wasn't involved in managing outcomes anymore. The words landed harder than she expected. She asked what that meant. She said marriage was supposed to mean working through things. She said she hadn't known I would take her words so literally. I told her I had. That was when she broke composure. Not dramatically, just enough. Her voice tightened. She asked if I was punishing her. She asked if this was revenge. She said it felt calculated. I didn't deny the calculation. I denied the emotion. I told her I'd adjusted my time to match my value. I told her I'd stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. I told her the distance wasn't a tactic. It was a boundary. She stood there for a long moment after that. The street noise filled the space between us. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life continued without waiting for her to catch up. She asked if there was any chance left. Not for forgiveness. For proximity. I didn't answer immediately. When I did, I told her that I was already living in the outcome of her earlier decision. She looked at me then like she was seeing a stranger. Not colder. Just unreachable. I wished her well and walked past her toward the door. She didn't follow. She didn't call after me. She stayed where she was, finally understanding that the conversation hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been about confirmation. And she'd just received it. The collapse didn't look the way people expect. There were no scenes, no public apologies, no dramatic exits. It happened in fragments, spread across days that no longer held structure for her. Claire stopped posting altogether. The confident updates vanished first, then the neutral ones. Her name still appeared in internal emails, but without weight. Projects reassigned. Responsibilities redistributed. She was present, but no longer central. People no longer checked her reaction before making decisions. I heard that Mark had taken a contract elsewhere. Quietly. No farewell. No announcement. Just gone. The explanation changed depending on who told it. Budget issues. Strategic shifts. Mutual decisions. None of it included her. At home, the apartment stayed untouched. She didn't redecorate. She didn't replace anything. She moved through the space like a guest who hadn't decided whether to stay the night. Lights on in empty rooms. The television running without sound. Food delivered and left half-eaten. She reached out less often now, but when she did, the messages were different. Not urgent. Not demanding. Observational. She mentioned small things. A coffee place we used to go to. A phrase I used to repeat. A jacket she found in the back of the closet that still smelled like my cologne. She didn't ask questions anymore. She stated facts, as if lining them up might change their meaning. We crossed paths once more, briefly, in a place that had nothing to do with either of our routines. She looked tired, not ruined, just stripped of the buffer that used to surround her. She watched me interact with someone else, noticed the ease, the lack of hesitation. Something in her expression shifted when she realized I hadn't just survived the separation. I'd reorganized around it. Later, I learned she tried to explain the situation to someone new. Framed it as a misunderstanding. A rough patch. A communication issue. The story didn't land. Without context, without status, without reinforcement, it sounded thin. The past started catching up to her in pieces. Not memories. Consequences. A meeting where she wasn't consulted. A call that didn't come back. A weekend with nothing scheduled and no one to fill it. Each absence pointed back to the same source. I wasn't there to witness most of it. I didn't need to be. The system was resolving itself. She had lost position, not through exposure, but through erosion. And there was nothing left for her to negotiate with. Nothing except the silence she'd once mistaken for acceptance. The final moment didn't arrive with urgency. It arrived after everything else had already settled into place. Claire reached out one last time, not through messages or intermediaries, but by asking to meet somewhere neutral. No history attached. No leverage built in. I agreed. She arrived early. I could tell by the way she stood when I walked in, already facing the door. She looked composed in the way people do when they've practiced restraint. Not hopeful. Not defensive. Open, but careful. She didn't start with explanations. She didn't apologize outright. She spoke about what she'd lost without naming it. About how things had unraveled once momentum disappeared. About how silence felt different when there was no one left to talk over it. She said she finally understood what she'd said that day in front of everyone. How she'd meant it as a boundary, not a dismissal. How she hadn't expected it to be taken as a conclusion. I let her finish. She asked if there was any version of us left that didn't feel like an afterthought. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for a reset. I told her that I'd already reset. That I'd rebuilt my days without accounting for her reactions. That I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't withholding anything. I was simply no longer available on terms that erased me. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She asked what that meant going forward. I told her that if there was to be anything, it wouldn't look like before. There would be no chasing, no assumptions, no blurred lines. Presence would be mutual,